So I'm going to start now. My name is Adam Weil. I'm the first speaker for the affirmation in this round. And we are affirming the resolution that the United States should substantially regulate and limit cryptocurrency. The standard is net benefits. So our plan, again, was to raise the crypto tax rate by 15% and additionally limit the trading to 2 transactions a day. This is a day trading system similar to that we have for the stock market, but is not currently in place for cryptocurrency. The first advantage for this plan and what will be the biggest advantage and impact in the rounds is that of the climate. In the status quo, we see 3 things. First and foremost, cryptocurrency mining, specifically Bitcoin mining, takes up huge amounts of energy. And this cryptocurrency mining is basically the process of running computers 24/7 to find these blockchains, which are these lines of code that is used to kind of get the currency and help out the currency. And this Bitcoin mining specifically consumes around 91 terawatt hours of electricity annually. And that is more electricity annually than Finland uses, than the entire country of Finland, which is a country of 5.5 million people. This Bitcoin mining is about 0.5% of all electricity consumption worldwide. And to make the problem worse, the electricity consumption is increasing rapidly. This 0.5% of all electricity consumption worldwide is a 10 times jump from what it was just 5 years ago. So this is a problem. This is a huge problem, and it is a problem that is getting worse and worse as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies get more and more popular. The second thing we see in the status quo is that Bitcoin transactions and cryptocurrency transactions are very harmful to the environment. Cryptocurrency transactions also use huge amounts of power. A single Bitcoin transaction is equivalent to uses the same amount of power as an American household will use in an entire month, and uses about 1 million times more energy than a single transaction with a Visa card. So the transactions themselves are incredibly harmful to our environment. And then the third thing we see in the status quo is that climate change is an incredible issue facing our nation, and the USA and other countries must decrease their energy usage overall if we want to fight this issue and avoid all the horrible impacts of climate change, death, destruction of environments, habitats, so on and so forth. Climate change is an incredible impact. The second advantage to our plan is that of regulation. Regulation will invariably non-advantage. Sorry, subpoint A under climate change is taxes. By heavily taxing crypto, this will disincentivize use of crypto. It will decrease the popularity of crypto by making it less popular, and therefore fewer people will be using it. There will be fewer transactions, there will be less blockchain mining, and this means less energy usage and decrease in the harm to our environments. The second subpoint B under the first advantage is that of regulation. Our regulation of the Bitcoin transactions to 2 a day, this just severely decreases the transactions that will be the Bitcoin transactions that will be happening, and thus decreases climate emissions. Because again, these transactions themselves are incredibly harmful to the environment and use huge amounts of energy. Now, our second advantage in this for the plan is that of the economy and economics. In the status quo, people are investing their money in a volatile and perhaps dangerous commodity. There's a huge threat of crypto crashing. There are not the same fail-safes and checks and balances in place that we have with money, with straight up American money, or with banks and the stock market. Additionally, so that's the first thing we see. It's a volatile and dangerous thing for people to be investing in. The second thing we see in the status quo is that cryptocurrency is not a productive place for money to sit. If people have money in the bank or in the stock market, this money is actively going towards making our economy and our world a more productive and better place through loans, through through providing profit for companies and value for companies that they can use to make products. And cryptocurrency is not a good place for the money to be sitting. It's not being useful at all. So subpoint A under this advantage of economics is that there are better places to put it. Again, if the money is placed in the bank or a stock market, and it will be placed in a bank or a stock market if cryptocurrency usage is decreased and disincentivized, and then it's going to be going towards making our economy a better place and just improving our economy overall. The second subpoint B is stability. Crypto is not stable, and by decreasing its popularity and forcing people to put their money and encouraging people to put their money elsewhere, American households will have more stable, will have more stable finances and will be at less risk of losing a lot of money and really screwing up their lives if crypto goes south. Because again, it's a pretty new thing. We don't know exactly where it's going to go, and it currently does not have proper checks and all that stuff. So the impacts for this second advantage of economics, American money is put in a better place. American citizens have more stable finances. Invested money gets put towards good things for producing value for the country. So our economy is improved. American finances are safer. So overall, again, our two advantages, the first advantage of climate is going to be the biggest advantage because it has the biggest impact on the round. And the second advantage of economy is also very important. We must regulate crypto. We must stop its growth now while we still can, save the environment, and while we still can make sure that American money is in safe and valuable places. Thank you.
Okay, so for a quick off-time roadmap, I will be going over our main point and then move on to responding to the affirmations case in the order it was read. Are there any questions about my order? Okay. If not, time starts now. I strongly negate the resolution the United States should substantially regulate and limit cryptocurrency. Let's talk about our first disadvantage, which is of the economy. Uniqueness are basically a description of the world today. Our first point under this is Bitcoin helps economies recover. Bitcoin is inherently diversified because it isn't subject to one economy's gain or loss. Rather, it represents wealth without borders. This means that it can function independently of the state of the US economy. This is especially key here during times of COVID when there's economic recessions. Bitcoin is one of the only industries that is actually able to avoid this and help boost the economy during this time. Our second uniqueness point is that decentralized currency helps developing nations in the status quo. Globally, over a third of the adult population lacks banking facilities and services that they can turn to in case of financial crises. That denies them the accessibility to loans and other critical financial assistance, further encouraging economic turmoil. Bitcoin has created excellent opportunities for those financially disadvantaged populations to access capital more conveniently. Bitcoin is a decentralized currency which allows individuals and businesses to exchange money freely across international borders. That enables even those without bank accounts in the US and outside the US to easily send and receive money for personal use in business. And this is really key here because the US, there's a lot of people in the US that do this crypto mining. So regulating that would greatly influence people in other nations. Now onto our links are basically how the plan is going to make this so much worse. Our first point under this is that past precedent indicates that it's bad for the regulation is bad for the economy. Cryptocurrency's rise has been arrested every time a government has cracked the policy whip. For example, in November 2019, Bitcoin sank to an all-time low when China accelerated a crackdown on cryptocurrency businesses. Even though banning it has no genuine impact on whether or not Bitcoin is actually used, investor confidence tanks every time countries move to regulate it. This harms major companies that accept crypto as currency and every Bitcoin investor. Our second point on this is that because the cryptocurrency market is not a domestic issue, but rather a global one, regulations simply make users turn to nations with even worse regulation than in the US. Look to the example of China. After China's crackdown on Bitcoin, there were big implications for Bitcoin's carbon footprint because emissions used to follow the ebb and flow of China's dry wet season. After all of these miners had to leave, they left to countries with worse environmental regulations, which spiked the environmental impact of Bitcoin. For a nation that is even more environmentally conscious than China, like the US, this issue of migration would be even worse with the plan text because people would move towards nations with less environmental regulations like Spain and Turkey. You're not getting rid of the incentive to have Bitcoin. You're simply putting regulations so they're going to fuel it in a different way that's ultimately worse for the environment. This happened because of different state regulations as well. In the US, Bitcoin miners flocked to places with cheap coal power, including Washington and Plattsburgh, New York. Mining gobbled up so much electricity that drove utility bills up for local residents. So we see here that because US investors are simply going to be moving to these developing nations, especially, that's going to specifically harm the people there. When states regulate specifically, and this is exactly what is happening. The issue with this is that the affirmation plan exacerbates the lack of a global standard and increases the negative effects of cryptocurrency by concentrating its impact in certain areas, destroying local economies. It is preferable for both Bitcoin to proliferate in countries with solid environmental regulations like the US, rather than forcing miners to take advantage of more relaxed environmental regulations elsewhere. Now, the impacts of this point are that of the economy. Recessions are happening because of COVID. Bitcoin is helping people with that. If there's no Bitcoin, it's much harder for small businesses to mitigate recessions, and harms the economy overall, which leads to an increased poverty and a decreased quality of life. And our second impact here is going to be that of pollution in the environment. The environment is, again, the internal link to the economy. More pollution in countries with less regulations harms fishing industries, agricultural industries, tourism, and more. And it has a tangible effect on economies. And we see here that this regulation in the US is simply going to make the environment worse. Now let's talk about the affirmation side of the case. So we have three key responses here on their environment point. Our first point is going to be called a link turn, and this specifically is a link turn on their point about taxes. The affirmation makes its claim that like taxes are going to make Bitcoin less profitable, and that somehow is going to make the environment better. However, exact opposite is going to happen. If Bitcoin is less profitable, individuals will be forced to find cheaper ways to fuel Bitcoin. This happened in South Korea when the government regulated the industries. Miners moved away from hydropower and towards more cheaper energy options like coal to power Bitcoin mining. Hampering an industry doesn't mean it will stay at that lower state. What will happen is they will try and rebuild that as fast as possible. That's how our economy works. It recedes and it tries to build back. But the issue with rebuilding back is that it ultimately is worse for the environment because they're going to find the fastest way to do it. And the fastest way to do it is by using coal and by using these terrible, like not environmentally friendly methods, which actually makes this whole point even worse. And that's a really key issue here. Our second key response here is going to be that of hand washing. What hand washing basically is, it's something that happens in US politics where a policy, like a blanket policy, like regulating cryptocurrency and putting taxes on it is put in place, and it supposedly fixes the environment when oftentimes it doesn't. But what happens is it shifts the political climate away from environmental policies. It gives Republicans an excuse. They say, oh, we don't want to pass like Biden's climate bill because we already have this going on. And it gives them an incentive not to pass those bills, and actually worsens climate activism and any climate change that could benefit the environment. Global emissions, in addition, global emissions would have to decline by 60% by 2050 to stop climate. Bitcoin mining, while detrimental, is inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, especially considering that both emissions from other countries are increasing exponentially. So what's key here is that because this is such a big issue and because it clearly, like the regulation and the taxes isn't going to be doing enough and actually is making it worse, that makes this hand washing issue even worse. Our third response here is going to be that of, like, again, it's simply our first link. You end up pushing regulations. Because of the regulations, you are pushing investors away to other nations. Again, look at the example of China. Global crypto emissions increased after they were banned in China because it pushed people away. By reducing competition, people still need to find ways to increase output cheaply elsewhere. It simply exacerbates the issue and does nothing to improve it. Now let's talk about their second point about the economy. We have four key responses here. The first point is when you increase volatility through regulation, it ultimately crashes the economy. Look to the China crash because of cryptocurrency. And also the stock market is also volatile, and that's what you're regulating it to, which is a good indicator that's actually going to be harming the industry there. Our second point is that so the affirmation makes its claim that it's better for money to be in banks rather than in cryptocurrency, but that ignores the fact that there are people that can't afford to keep money in the bank, and it ultimately, like making it harder to have cryptocurrency means that these people that can't afford to keep it in a bank will be even worse off, and it ultimately worsens the socioeconomic divide, which is incredibly bad for this. Our third key response is that volatility is decreasing in the status quo. We can see evidence of less volatility in Bitcoin following its late 2017 rally and subsequent pullback. This gradual calming influence is largely attributed to the arrival of more institutional investors in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. More investment decreases volatility. Because you are reversing investment, you are increasing volatility and ultimately harming the economy here. Next, they generally talk about how it's not reliable. However, destroying the economy means that there's less innovation in the cryptocurrency industry. If you have less innovation in there, that means that there's not going to be as many fail safes to make sure that like bad things don't happen when your money is in it. You're not going to remove, like, there's still going to be people in cryptocurrency. You're simply actually making it worse for the people in there because you do nothing about this and simply exacerbate the issue. So for those reasons, it's a clear negation ballot. Thank you.
All right, we have a little bit of cross-examination. I'm gonna get up a timer. 2 minutes. All right, my first question, is cryptocurrency bad for the environment, yes or no?
Cryptocurrency is bad for the environment, but ultimately.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions, Jack?
I think that's all.
All right, that's all. Thank you. I'm turning your hand on. Okay, cool. All right, I'll have 8 minutes for my speech. Let me get up my documents. For a little off-time roadmap, I will first be responding to our opponent's case. Then I will be going back over the side affirmations case. Time starts now. Hello, my name is Jack Weiland. I'm the second speaker for the affirmation in today's debate. So let's get into our opponent's case. Their first disadvantage was that of the economy, and we had an advantage, which was out of the economy. First, they made the argument that Bitcoin helps economies to recover. They gave no warranting for this. They said it represents wealth without border and it works independent of countries, and that's great. Well, a problem of working independent of countries is that it makes Bitcoin horribly volatile, it makes Bitcoin horribly unstable because it is not centralized and does not have a centralized value. The crazy change in value makes it a volatile makes it a volatile source of income for many people that, for all the reasons we outlined in our second advantage about the economy, is bad for the entire world. Their second point is that it helps developing communities. It creates opportunities for lower income people to access capital clearly, and they don't have to have a bank account to use it. But are developing nations really investing in Bitcoin? Is someone in crippling poverty in Ghana, is someone who is in crippling poverty, are they really investing in Bitcoin? No. The people who are investing in Bitcoin are already wealthy people. It's people like Elon Musk. It's people who follow Elon Musk on Twitter. And like Elon Musk a couple months ago made some tweet on Twitter about how Dogecoin was suddenly increasing value, which is another kind of cryptocurrency. A ton of people flow to Dogecoin. He's done the same about Bitcoin. It's not people in developing countries investing in Bitcoin. Additionally, you need big computers. You need these big computers running 24/7 that harm the environment in order to actually mine Bitcoin and make a substantial amount of money on Bitcoin. And these developing nations don't have these capabilities, don't have these computers. People in these nations don't have these computers and are not the ones accessing Bitcoin at all. So you can completely disregard this point because that is just not the communities that are using them. It doesn't help them at all because they do not have any access. Then they made the point that miners will run to countries with worse environmental rules, et cetera. They said about China and that it doesn't help to regulate in the US because they'll go elsewhere. And they also agree crypto is bad for the environment. But what our plan is doing, it is decreasing the value of cryptocurrency worldwide by taxing it in the US and by heavily regulating it. And our opponents did not get into this case of how transactions work and how transactions also decrease the value of crypto. By decreasing the value of crypto worldwide, we decrease worldwide how many people are investing in it. If it is not worth as much, there will not be as many investors in crypto. We are decreasing usage because we're decreasing the amount of transactions people can make and also taxing it so it is worth less to people. So going on to their, I believe that's all of their case that we'll be covering. Now let's go on to the affirmations case. So sorry, my computer is not being great. All right. So for their answer to taxes, they basically said that if Bitcoin is less profitable, people will just find cheaper ways to power it, and people will suddenly be turned into coal, and people will be powering their computers that are running with coal, which they already are. That is, the majority of the energy in the US is not green energy. They're already using that energy to do these computers, and but what they failed to realize is that people will just pull their money out of Bitcoin. They're not going to invest all this money in finding some new coal plant to use, some mysterious coal plant to use to find their energy from. They're just going to be taking their money out of crypto, which is exactly what we want to happen, and investing it elsewhere, putting into banks, putting it into the stock market, etc. Just putting it into US money, because it also our plan decreases the growth of crypto, decreases the rate of change as to which people are investing in it, because it is not going to be as lucrative for someone in the US to suddenly put their money into crypto. So not only does it make people pull their money out of crypto now, it means that it decreases growth, and Bitcoin is growing at an exponential rate. Bitcoin is growing in a way that hurts the environment horribly. We need to find a way to decrease growth, and the best way to do it is by decreasing the amount of transactions people can do. If they can only do 2 transactions a day, that greatly decreases the use of it and greatly decreases the value of it. Now our point about regulation, they basically said, oh, it doesn't matter, even if this plan, they basically conceded that this plan will have good environmental impacts. And they said, no, it's not good that it has good environmental impacts, because then the Republicans will go ahead and point to, you can do it in cross examinations. Other Republicans will come along and they'll say, oh no, we already passed this good policy relating to Bitcoin. But what they fail to realize that this is not how the public sees it. This is not how the majority of politicians see it. Bitcoin, this policy does not seem directly related to the environment, even though most of its impacts are about the environment. This isn't something that Republicans are going to be able to point to because most people just have no idea how Bitcoin works. So you can throw out this point about hand washing altogether because that is not how people will see it. People don't understand Bitcoin. People don't understand the impacts of Bitcoin. Politicians aren't going to be able to spin that in any way possible. They also made the point, we don't have these impacts because global emissions need to decrease by 60%. Bitcoin mining is too small. It won't make a difference. But because of the massive growth of Bitcoin, because it has increased 10 times in the last 5 years and is only getting more popular, is only getting more international, people are only investing more and more in it as its value grows and grows. We need to stem its growth. And also it is not a small bit. It is 0.5% of all global electricity usage. It is the same amount of electricity usage as the entire country of Finland. This is not a small amount, especially for something that is growing at such an exponential rate. 10% growth means 10 times growth is a huge amount of growth, and it's only growing more and more every year. So now going on to our second advantage, we made the argument about how once people pull their money out of crypto or won't be investing in crypto anymore, they'll be investing their money in other places like the stock market or like banks, which are much more stable. They made the argument that the stock market is also volatile, and increasing volatility crashes the economy, but Bitcoin is not large enough in the US right now to completely crash the economy when it decreases in value. We've already seen this because Bitcoin has already gone from huge amounts of money to very, very low amounts of money. It didn't crash the economy, but it will in the future if we let it go rampant as it is now, because it is growing at an exponential rate. More people are putting their money into it, and it creates a situation where we will have a less stable American economy in the future if Bitcoin crashes. We need to make it crash now. We need to make it less valuable now. The stock market is volatile, but it is not nearly as volatile as Bitcoin, and it is directly related to something in the material world that is directly related to investing in companies, and people can make smart decisions about investing in companies, something that they cannot do about Bitcoin, because an individual person has no control over how much Bitcoin is worth. And this doesn't answer to our point about banks at all, because banks are the most stable place to put your money, and that is where many people would be putting their money if not for investing in this volatile economy of Bitcoin. So for all these reasons, you can't believe that the stock market is more volatile than Bitcoin or anything like that. Now, their answer to stability, they said, well, it's going to destroy our economy, and it's going to destroy the economy of Bitcoin. And that means less innovation in the crypto community. It's not destroying our economy, it's destroying crypto. And innovation in crypto, as they said, it means more coal usage. We don't want innovation in crypto. We don't want any more value in crypto. We don't want anything that is going to make crypto more valuable. And what our plan directly does, and our opponents seem to agree with us, it decreases usage of crypto. It makes it less valuable worldwide, because by making it less valuable in the US, it makes it less valuable worldwide by decreasing the amount of transactions by a huge amount, by limiting it to 2 transactions a day in the US. That makes it nearly impossible to use in your day-to-day life. People in the US will no longer be investing in this because they won't be able to use it. They're not going to be putting their money in crypto in China because they won't be able to use their money in crypto in China, even if it's not being taxed. So our plan actually attacks it with a 2-pronged approach, which is what makes it so effective. For all these reasons, please vote for the affirmation in today's debate.
All right, I have a quick question here. It's just one question. We probably won't be using the rest of cross-X, but you talk a lot about like taxing and how that's part of your plan, but then you like briefly mentioned regulations. What even regulations would you be putting in the plan? Is it in the plan text? Just explain that.
Yeah, it is directly in our plan text, which you didn't really respond to this point, but it is included in our plan that we're limiting Bitcoin trading or crypto trading to 2 transactions a day.
Okay, but are there any other regulations on like any environmental procedures or any like way that Bitcoin is actually held and the security related to that?
So the 2 things our plan is doing, and this is in the plan.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Raising the crypto tax rate by 15%, and we're limiting trading to 2 transactions.
Yes, you answered my question. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. I'm going to be going over the negative case and then the affirmative case. If everyone's ready, my time starts now. First, let's look at their plan. Their entire plan rests on the idea that they're going to be massively tanking the amount of Bitcoin that individuals are trading. And they say that they're going to limit this to 2 trades a day. The problem with this is that about 46 million Americans currently own Bitcoin. If that's 2 transactions a day, that's still millions of transactions that are happening every day. So their solvency is pretty much gutted here, because they're arguing that they're going to be creating these massive environmental differences, when really these 2 transactions a day fails to take into account the sheer variety and amount of people that actually own Bitcoin in the status quo. Additionally, Bitcoin and all other cryptocurrencies are completely decentralized peer-to-peer systems. There is no central server to shut down, there's no one to catch, and crucially, there's no one to prosecute, which means that there's literally no way to enforce this law. Put simply, no government on the planet can stop individuals from downloading a wallet or mining client and connecting to the Bitcoin industry. Literally just ask the United States and other developed countries who have been trying to crack down on illegal P2P torrents over the last decade. So even if you don't buy this entire 46 million individuals in the US have Bitcoin, 2 transactions a day literally does nothing to mitigate the climate. It's literally impossible for the US to regulate this. They've been trying to do this for decades, and it's just difficult because of this entire thing about how Bitcoin is not centralized. It's not tied to a single dollar. You can't break into people's homes and get rid of their Bitcoin servers, so this is just entirely impossible to enforce. Moving on to the negative side of the case about the economy. So they say on our first uniqueness point that we have no.
Kathy, you cut out for me.
Yeah, we can't hear you either.
We lost your audio. Does anybody know how far she is time-wise? Oh, wait.
What?
Kathy, you cut out when you were about to talk about their uniqueness.
That is a bummer. Okay, how many seconds was I out for?
About a half a minute.
Okay. Did you hear the whole solvency deficit thing?
Yeah.
Okay, sick. I'm going to, so I was at 6.5 minutes. Does that sound reasonable?
Probably.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Resuming time now. Let's then move to the negative's first disadvantage about the economy. They tell you that we have no warrant here, when in fact we have several. We tell you that because Bitcoin is not tied to the value of a single dollar or of a Chinese yen, that it is able to mitigate financial collapses because it's unaffected by financial collapses in countries. They also tell you that Bitcoin is volatile, but we already respond to this. We tell you that the volatility of Bitcoin is decreasing in the status quo specifically because of increased investment, which they reverse. So ultimately, it is the affirmative side here that is increasing the volatility of Bitcoin by decreasing the amount of innovation that's able to happen in this sector, and also decreasing the amount of individuals that are able to invest in it. So ultimately, you also see this in China, we'll talk about this later. And then they talk about how developing nations aren't developing Bitcoin and how individuals don't have computers to mine Bitcoin. First of all, you don't need to literally mine Bitcoin to invest in it. The majority of individuals do not have a Bitcoin server in their room mining it by the second. You just invest or buy Bitcoin. Also, there's lots of individuals in the US who do not have bank accounts. We're not just talking about developing nations here. We're talking about people of lower socioeconomic classes that have financial barriers to having bank accounts or other things like that. Even if you don't buy that, even if developing nations aren't developing Bitcoin right now, the fact that Bitcoin has such great potential to allow for these developing nations to develop faster because it's easier, there's not a lot of financial infrastructure you have to put into place, clearly.
You cut out again. Kathy.
We can't hear you.
I think it's the storm because my power went out as well. So.
They just completely
Kathy, you cut out again.
It's so annoying. Okay.
Let's turn off our cameras. That might help.
Yeah. Okay. How long was that one for?
Same length as last time.
That's irritating. Okay. Hopefully that's the last time. Maybe it's the rain or something. Okay. What was the last thing I said? Was the last thing I said?
The word clearly.
The word clearly. Okay. Well,
I know.
That has a lot of potential to be used in a lot of different sentences. What was I saying?
I think you're talking about how lots of Americans don't have bank accounts.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna put me at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Okay, sorry. Okay, resuming time now. First of all, the majority of new users of Bitcoin are under the poverty line in the US. So this clearly indicates that Bitcoin has great potential to be a vast economic resource for low-income individuals. It's not just Elon Musk that owns Bitcoin, it's a lot of individuals that are of low socioeconomic status. Additionally, I hope you heard this, but you don't need to mine Bitcoin to invest in it. Just because people don't have the money to have literal Bitcoin servers in the room doesn't mean they're not going to be buying Bitcoin. Also, we're not just talking about developing nations here. There's lots of individuals in the US that lack bank accounts, and this has the potential to greatly affect their financial situations. Now in the links, we tell you that 1, regulation hurts the economy. They cold concede this. We tell you that when individuals are no longer able to buy Bitcoin, like they've put a lot of savings into Bitcoin for a lot of people. So ultimately, if you ban Bitcoin, that's going to hurt them. There's a double bind here because 1, either you buy that because 46 million individuals like have Bitcoin in the US, you're not actually having a tangible impact on like any regulations whatsoever. Or if you buy that this is going to tank the price of Bitcoin and like horribly affect the trading amount of Bitcoin, you're going to be buying that's going to hurt the economy because lots of individuals have like substantial savings put into Bitcoin. Lots of like companies rely on Bitcoin to fund their services, especially small businesses. So ultimately, you're going to be extending that regulation is going to hurt the economy. Also, to our second link, they tell you that people aren't going to move elsewhere because the plan decreases the value of cryptocurrency. We already cover this. Like just because something decreases the value doesn't mean that people are going to stop doing it. Through supply and demand, if the value of cryptocurrency decreases, they're going to have to decrease the cost of inputs to match like the money that they had in Bitcoin by just making more Bitcoin, which actually means there's going to be more mining because they're going to need to create more Bitcoin to like have the same amount of wealth they had before. Also look to South Korea. This is literally a textbook example of when you make the value of Bitcoin like lesser, you turn to other less environmentally friendly ways to mine it. Like look at the fact that South Korea used to fund Bitcoin mining with hydropower and they switched to coal after the South Korean government tried to regulate it. And it was ultimately worse for both the environment and the economy. There was also a decrease in transactions after, or like people had to, there was a decrease in investor confidence in China and it was worse for the economy. It didn't actually even decrease the amount of Bitcoin trading. It literally just made them move elsewhere, even though like in theory, China is the ultimate like decrease in the value of cryptocurrency because they literally banned it and that didn't happen. It just moved people other places. So either you buy that it decreases the value of cryptocurrency, which means people are going to have to turn to less environmentally friendly methods, or it doesn't decrease the value of cryptocurrency at all. It's just going to cause an investor freak out, which hurts the economy. Now onto the affirmative side of the case. There are a couple key concessions here. So first of all, on their climate advantage, they talk about hand washing. They say that this isn't how politicians work, that the policy initially does not seem related to the environment, and that we've seen massive growth of Bitcoin. First of all, environmental regulations are expensive. Politicians don't want to pass them. Any excuse they can have to say, oh, we've done something, look, we've passed environmental regulations, they're going to use. If like, given that the first argument the affirmative brought up was of the environment, it's pretty clear that Bitcoin is pretty tied to the environment. So they're probably going to be thinking about this. Also, they're literally spinning this on the Congress floor right now, and Republicans are coming up with issues. Also, extend the drop in a bucket argument. This simply does not solve for climate change. Even if we're seeing massive growth in Bitcoin, the emissions of other countries are also growing exponentially. The best way to mitigate its climate risk is to keep it in countries with substantial environmental regulations like the US and not force miners to have to go to, say, Turkey or Spain, where the environmental regulations are much worse. Also, even if you don't buy any of that, you're going to be prioritizing the economy before climate. Developing nations or developed nations cannot prioritize climate if their economy is suffering. You need to have a good GDP to, say, invest in solar or hydropower. If your GDP is crumbling because you've taken out like a key way that people save their money, like you're not going to be able to put in, like you're going to be investing in coal and cheaper forms of energy. So ultimately, even if you don't buy any of our responses on this, you're going to be buying, you have to look at the economy before you look at climate. Then they tell you that people will just pull money out of Bitcoin and put them in banks. The Great Depression was caused by poorly run banks. There's so many economic disasters in the US that have occurred because of banks. Like banks are not immune to volatility. Ultimately, if we're buying that just everyone is going to be stuffing their money in banks, that's probably going to be causing some sort of like economic situation that's not going to be good for America at large. Also, this means people lose money. Like if they're going to have to pull all of their money out of Bitcoin, that means they're going to lose money. Investor freakout leads to tangible like decreases in money. You're going to be causing a negative like economic response. Now on the economy point, they drop two key responses here. First of all, we tell you that volatility is decreasing in the SQO specifically because of more institutional investors into the cryptocurrency ecosystem. By decreasing investment, they increase volatility, which ultimately is worse for the economy for people that choose to keep their money in Bitcoin. Ultimately, the negative is clearly better for decreasing volatility because we maintain the status quo where volatility is decreasing. They also drop a response about how it is ultimately inaccessible for a lot of people to keep money in the bank. They're ultimately worsening this socioeconomic divide and reversing the trend we're seeing where the majority of new investors in Bitcoin are individuals that are low income. And they tell you that Bitcoin can't crash the economy. This is a clear double bind. A lot of people have multiple savings in it. You're also saying essentially that the Bitcoin economy doesn't matter. If it doesn't matter, then essentially we should just drop this second advantage, because if it can't have that big of an impact on the economy, then we can't buy that volatility is going to hurt the economy. They also finally say they don't want to make cryptocurrency more valuable, but this means that you increase volatility by decreasing investor confidence. For these reasons, I urge a strong vote for the negative side of this debate. Thank you. Sorry about all the timing issues or the cutting in and out.
Yeah, we have cross-X. I believe we have, how many seconds left was it?
1 minute 44 seconds.
1 minute 44 seconds. So we'll start now. Our first question is, are you aware that Bitcoin transactions are already taxed by the government?
If they're already taxed by the government, then why hasn't that stopped the environmental
And
impact?
are you aware of the fact that South Korea, after taxing cryptocurrency greatly?
You'd ask me questions. I was just asking a question. Are you aware? Yes or no?
I mean, you just told me, so now I'm aware.
Okay. So yes, those are all our questions.
Alrighty. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so for a quick off-time roadmap, I will be first talking about this general solvency deficit issue with the plan text, and then go over some general preempts, and then some weighing in voters. This can all probably be flowed on a separate piece of paper since it's not direct line by line. Okay, if everyone's ready, my time starts now. I strongly negate the resolution the United States should substantially regulate and limit cryptocurrency. Okay, let's talk about this huge solvency deficit that's in the plan text. The affirmations cross-X question actually segues perfectly into this. They say that we're already taxing cryptocurrency. Maybe that's why it's so volatile already. And maybe that's why the exact same thing. When South Korea increased their taxes, the economy became more volatile and the environment got much worse. It's already proof that this taxing and the methods that the affirmation is using is ultimately worse for both the economy and the environment. Now let's talk about this key claim that the affirmation keeps bringing up. They assume that their plan is actually going to be decreasing the volume of cryptocurrency, but they completely ignore our point that the industry will simply shift to other places. It's called crypto migration, and it's happened time and time again. It's exactly what happened in South Korea. The actual amount of Bitcoin doesn't decrease because of taxes or a transaction limit. What happens is it simply migrates industries. It simply moves from South Korea to China or moves to other nations. And for this example, it's probably going to be moving to Turkey. And this is something that they don't respond to. And the real issue here is that because the volume isn't decreasing and it's then just going to countries that have even worse regulations, it's going to make everything worse. And their entire case relies on the fact that they are somehow decreasing the actual volume of Bitcoin that they are using. But because they haven't proven that, there's simply no solvency for the affirmations plan. Let's talk about another issue with their plan text. They lack any clear regulation. If they actually wanted to fix the environment, they would have policies in place for that and actual regulations instead of just limiting the number of transactions or increasing the number of taxes. That isn't direct regulation. Instead, what is happening is that these regulations that matter and are in the US are ignored because they are moved to other nations. Now let's talk about some general preemptive arguments, or basically things that the PMR should not have access to. Don't let them go for the economic volatility point. They ignore a point that the cryptocurrency market is less volatile and is increasingly less volatile, specifically because the industry is increasing. With more people in the cryptocurrency industry, the volatility is decreased because it simply has more people in it. That's basic economics. When you decrease that number, it's simply going to make the volatility even worse. So their whole point about economic volatility is simply going to be worse under the plan. And now don't let them talk about oh, we already use coal, so this migration thing doesn't matter. This isn't true. First of all, the US mainly uses hydroelectric when it comes to Bitcoin servers. But in addition, it's simply going to make the issue worse. Even if we use coal now, it's going to be so much worse under the plan because coal is cheaper. If you're hampering an industry and they have to rebuild, they're going to use the cheaper option, which is coal. Also, again, don't let them talk about how oh, we're already taxing, so it's not going to have these effects. They are having these effects because of the fact that they are already taxing and because these issues are actually what is causing this. Now let's talk about some general weighing. Or before that, again, another solvency deficit is that the government is literally powerless against Bitcoin. My partner mentioned this. specifically because Bitcoin is not centralized. There's no way to actually regulate it. They have no solvency there, and that's something that they haven't responded to throughout the debate. Now, some general weighing, we're obviously better for the environment. The affirmation has no tangible impact on the environment when emissions are increasing in the status quo. They're simply just trying to solve for a tiny bit of it, when in actuality, they're making things worse through hand washing and the fact that emissions are increasing from other countries. And that's something worsened under the plan. And again, the economy, their only point under the economy is economic volatility, while they ignore the fact that millions of Americans would lose thousands of dollars under their plan tax because they have money in Bitcoin. It doesn't work. You can't just like pull it out of Bitcoin and put it in bank. You lose money through that process. And they also ignore the fact that volatility is improving and that they're going to reverse all of those effects. All their claims are basically like, oh, we're going to destroy the Bitcoin industry so no one has Bitcoin anymore. And then that's going to somehow be better because we're going to move it to banks, when that is not what's going to happen. Now, finally, you could be voting negation simply on our point about China and South Korea. The plan has already passed in those nations, and the affirmation fails to respond to the fact that the environment was worse because of these regulations and this taxing, and the economy was worse because of it too. Don't let them respond to it in the PMR. So for those reasons, it's a clear negation ballot. Thank you.
All right, yeah. I have 5 minutes. Time will start. Time will start now. First and foremost, I want to answer a point that we did not have a chance to respond to before. That's the idea of enforcement. Again, we already have taxes in the status quo. And also we regulate the stock market, which is a very similar thing. So this idea of enforcement, that we can't enforce it, does not flow through. And we already do it, and we already regulate similar things. Now, I want to get into the true context of this debate, and that is the climate and climate change. The side that will win this debate is a side that can prove they better answer the issue of climate change. Sorry, yeah?
My partner and I lost power. I have solar power, but I don't think she's on the Zoom anymore. Hold on. It's probably fine because she's not speaking. Just let you know that she's not on here because her power is out.
Okay, cool. Sorry, this has been quite a round.
You can start from the top if you want.
Okay, sure. I'll start from the top. Sorry. All right, start time now. I want to respond to a point that did not get a chance to respond to before. This idea that we can't enforce our plan. It's already enforced in the status quo. We already have taxes on cryptocurrency. And again, we regulate a similar thing, which is the stock market. So it is very much possible, and it does happen in the status quo. Now, I talked about in my very first speech that the issue of climate would be the single biggest issue in this round because it has the biggest impacts, far outweigh those of the economy, even though we should still win the points on the economy because Bitcoin is volatile and is not really accessible to developing nations. Or even a big enough industry in the US to cause big issues, but climate will be the biggest issue in this round. So whichever side proves that their side better solves the climate should win this round. First and foremost, a concession. Our opponents have agreed with us that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. Now the question is, does our plan decrease the use of Bitcoin? And the fact of the matter is yes. I want to go through the specific plan text. We are raising the crypto tax rate. Well, that's the first thing we did. And the second thing we did was limit trading to 2 transactions a day. And this is something our opponents almost didn't respond to. Limiting to 2 transactions a day means that we are literally decreasing the usage of cryptocurrency. We are decreasing how, and I talked about this again in my first speech, how we can, you can't go out and buy pizza with cryptocurrency. You can't go to the store and buy cryptocurrency. It is no longer an actual useful form of money in the US anymore because you can only have 2 transactions a day. This is severely limiting Bitcoin transactions. So even if you don't buy any of the other arguments, just by the fact of this transaction clause, because we are severely limiting and perhaps destroying that how cryptocurrency can be used in the US by limiting it to 2 transactions a day, cryptocurrency essentially can't really be used. These transactions can't happen. And this in of itself is decreasing climate emissions and is fighting climate change. So this itself, transactions, it's half of our plan, should win us today's debate. And the second part of our plan, and transactions destroys growth. The Bitcoin industry can't grow in America if you can only have 2 transactions a day. And then the second part of our plan, the second half of our plan was the idea of taxation. And we explained to you how taxation is going to decrease the overall value of Bitcoin, and thus the viability of it as a money, and force people to put their money elsewhere, to put into banks, stock market, to not use Bitcoin. And pretty much they just said that if we tax it, people are going to go to other countries and try and use it. But the way that taxing works is, the way that taxing works is that it would be in the US. It's not like an environmental regulation to get around. If you want to use Bitcoin in the US, you're going to have these 2 transactions and you're going to have to be taxed to use it. And this just inherently decreases the value of Bitcoin. And when something is more expensive to use, less people are going to use it. It's not really a stretch. So inherently our plan does decrease, it decreases Bitcoin's viability. It is more expensive to use, it's harder to use, and thus it decreases climate change, it decreases carbon emissions. And this is just a fact of the round. And they even said in their first speech, they agreed that they gave up this evidence of China. When China regulated, Bitcoin usage went down, but the Bitcoin market in China crashed. So it's proof we have historical precedent for regulations helping. And we also have to consider how bad is climate change. Climate change is a huge issue. And Bitcoin is just getting worse and worse. We have to do our plan. We have to do something about Bitcoin right now. Because again, even though they say, first of all, it already has lots of climate emissions. Again, the mining alone is the same as the country of Norway, and 0.5% Finland, of 0.5% of carbon emissions all over the world. But it is increasing. Again, it's been a 10 times increase from 5 years ago, and it is just continuing to increase. So unless we enact this plan, unless we stop the growth, and our plan does stop the growth because of the transactions just limiting it in general, and the taxation decreasing the value of it, our plan limits the growth of cryptocurrency. So it prevents cryptocurrency from increasing emissions in the future. So even if it perhaps isn't the hugest issue in climate change right now, it's not going to change the world right now. In 5-10 years, it could, and our plan is stopping that danger. So the probability of our plan helping stop climate change is very, very high, and it is something that must be voted on in this debate. And then you have this, don't let them confuse you with this issue of hand washing. Again, Bitcoin is an unrelated topic to the voters, to the politicians. It's not something that they can yell about on Capitol Hill. And besides, this is still an incredibly useful and effective climate change plan, even though it is about Bitcoin. So because our plan is the only one with offense on climate change, the only one doing anything to stop climate change, you must vote for the affirmation in today's round. Thank you.